My brother stood in my doorway with his arm around my mother's shoulder, pointing at me like I was a stranger. She stole it, Mom. I watched her do it. And the worst part, the part that made my knees go soft, was that my mother believed him without blinking. 36 hours earlier, he had called me crying, begging me to cover for him one more time. I said yes. I always said yes. That's the problem with being the quiet one. People learn to use your silence like a weapon. Let me take you back to where it actually started. I'm 32. I work as a dental hygienist in a mid-sized town in Ohio. I rent a 2-bedroom house on the edge of a neighborhood that's not quite nice and not quite rough, the kind of street where people wave at you from their driveways but don't know your last name. I've lived there 4 years. I have a rescue dog named Biscuit, a standing Thursday dinner reservation at a Thai place 2 miles away, and a life I built one very deliberate brick at a time. After years of chaos, I wanted ordinary. I earned ordinary. My brother Theo is 3 years younger than me. He is charming, the way a gas leak is charming. You don't notice the smell until the room is already on fire. Growing up, he was the one who could talk his way out of anything. Broken curfew? He had a story. Failed test? The teacher had it out for him. Every consequence that should have landed on Theo somehow found its way to me instead, because I was older, because I was calmer, because I never cried as loud. Our parents called it maturity. I know now it was a different word entirely. The call came on a Tuesday night. I was on my couch with Biscuit, half asleep on my lap, watching something I'd already seen twice. The kind of mindless rewatching you do when your brain needs to be quiet. My phone buzzed. Theo, I stared at it for 2 full rings. Then I picked up, because I always pick up. He was crying before I could say hello. Real crying, not the performance kind. Or at least that's what I told myself. He said he was in trouble. He said he'd borrowed money from our parents' joint savings account to cover a debt he owed. Just a short-term thing. He was going to put it back before they noticed, but his paycheck had bounced and the window was closing fast, and if Mom found out before he could fix it, it would destroy everything. How much? I asked. $4,000. I closed my eyes. Our mother, Sandra, had been saving that money in small deposits over 8 years. She talked about it like it was sacred. A trip to Portugal she'd promised herself after our dad retired. Something that was just hers in a marriage that had always prioritized everyone else's needs first. Theo knew what that money meant. He'd been at the dinner table the same as me every time she mentioned it. I want to be clear about something. I knew even in that moment that I should have said no. I had $4,000 in my emergency fund. I had worked for it, set it aside, left it untouched through 2 car repairs and a flooded basement because that's what emergency funds are for. But Theo was crying, and he was using the voice he's used since we were children, the one that says, "I'm drowning, and you're the only one who can reach me." I had been trained since childhood to respond to that voice the way a dog responds to a whistle. Not out of love, or not only out of love, out of conditioning. "I'll wire it tonight," I said. "But Theo, this is the last time." He said, "Of course." He said he meant it. He said he was going to get his life together and he knew I deserved better from him. I transferred the money from my savings into my parents' account before midnight. I sent Theo a screenshot and went to bed. Wednesday, I went to work. I cleaned 12 sets of teeth, reminded 4 people to floss, drove home through traffic, fed Biscuit, and went to sleep thinking it was over. Thursday morning, my phone exploded. 12 missed calls, 7 from my mother, 3 from my father, Gene, 2 from a number I didn't recognize. A string of texts from my mother that started confused and ended somewhere past furious. The most recent one said, "We're coming over. Don't go anywhere." I sat up in bed with Biscuit pressed against my legs, reading the texts twice, then a third time. They thought money was missing from the account. They thought I had taken it. I almost laughed. I had replaced the money. I had put it back. There was no missing money. There couldn't be. Unless I opened my banking app with hands that had gone very still. I looked at the transfer I'd made 2 nights ago. $4,000. Confirmed. Timestamp showed Wednesday at 11:47 p.m. Then I looked at the account number I'd sent it to. It wasn't my parents' account. The account number Theo had texted me, the one I'd copied and pasted in a hurry, half asleep, trusting him completely, was off by 2 digits. The money had gone somewhere else. I sat there staring at that screen for a long time, the kind of staring where your brain is processing something it doesn't want to be true. Theo had given me the wrong account number. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt even now. I want to say it was an accident, a typo in a panicked moment. But what happened next made it very hard to believe that. My parents arrived 40 minutes later. My mother came through the front door like she'd already decided how this ended. My father followed behind her with the look he always gets when conflict is happening, present but unreachable, like a man watching a storm through a window. Theo was with them. He stood in my doorway, the house I pay for, with his arm around my mother's shoulder and pointed at me and said she did it. I watched her do it. I had never, in 32 years, heard my brother say those words about me. We had protected each other. We had covered for each other. Even when we were at our worst, there was a line. I thought there was a line. My mother said my name like it was a question and an accusation at the same time. I stood in the middle of my living room and I did not yell. I did not cry. I said, I didn't take anything. I transferred money in. Let me show you. But Thea was already talking over me, explaining to my mother that I had always resented her, that I'd been jealous of the Portugal trip since she first mentioned it, that I had access to their account because they'd added me years ago in case of emergencies. He had a whole story. It was detailed. It was calm. It had clearly been prepared. That's the thing about people who gaslight you over a lifetime. They don't make it up in the moment. They build the case in advance. My mother didn't look at my phone when I held it out. My father took it, glanced at the screen, and said the number didn't match. He was right. It didn't match because Theo had given me a different number. But when I said that out loud, Theo shook his head slowly and said, with genuine-sounding sadness, that he'd never sent me anything, that I was twisting the story, that this was what I always did. I looked at my father. He looked away. I had been the reliable one my whole life, the one who showed up, who solved things quietly, who never asked for credit, and in that moment, none of it counted. Because my mother was crying, and Theo was the one standing next to her, and I was the one standing alone in the middle of the room, being told what I had done, they left without letting me finish a sentence. My mother sent one more text from the driveway. It said, I don't know who you've become, but I don't recognize you. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time after that. Biscuit put his chin on my knee. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower started up, that completely ordinary sound, and I remember thinking, how is any of that still happening? How is the world still doing normal things? Here is what I want you to understand about why I didn't fight louder in that moment. It's not because I didn't have the words. It's not because I was stupid or passive or weak. It's because when the people who are supposed to know you best look at you like you're a stranger, something in your nervous system stops working the way it should. 32 years of being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who handled things, and none of it built any defense against the specific pain of being looked at by your own mother like you're something she's disappointed she ever trusted. I filed a police report that afternoon. Not because I expected it to fix anything immediately, but because I needed there to be a record. The officer who took my statement was a woman in her 40s named Officer Tanaka, and she listened without interrupting, which I was not expecting and which made me cry in a way I hadn't yet. I showed her the text thread with Theo, the request, the account number he'd sent, my confirmation that the wire had gone through. She wrote everything down. She told me the wrong account situation was actually traceable and that the bank would have records. She said it could take a few days, but the transfer would show exactly where the money went. While I was waiting, my aunt called. My mother's sister, Carla, who I've always been close to, who came to my college graduation when my parents had a conflict and couldn't make it, that Carla, she said she'd heard what happened and she needed me to know that not everyone believed it. She said she'd been watching Theo for years and she wasn't surprised, which broke my heart and helped me at the same time. She also told me something I hadn't known. Theo had a gambling problem, not a minor one. He borrowed money from 3 different family members in the past 2 years, a cousin, a family friend, my great-uncle Raymond, and in each case the story had been similar. He needed a bridge. He was going to pay it back. When he didn't, the stories got more complicated, and somehow the fault always migrated towards someone else. My aunt had tried to tell my mother 6 months ago. My mother had not wanted to hear it. I spent 2 days barely leaving the house. I answered work emails, showed up for my shifts, came home, and sat with the particular silence of a person who is waiting to find out if the truth is going to matter. On the 3rd day, the bank called me back. The account Theo had sent me, the one I'd wired $4,000 to, was in his name, not a stranger's account, not a typo. A second account he'd opened under his own name at a different bank, specifically to receive that money. I want to say that again clearly, because when the bank representative told me, I had to ask her to repeat it. The account was his. The wrong number wasn't an accident. He had sent me to the wrong account on purpose so that he could tell our parents the money was still missing while quietly sitting on the funds I'd transferred. He had used me to steal from our mother. He had counted on me to wire the money without question, counted on me to be too embarrassed or confused to immediately raise an alarm, and then he had walked into my house with our parents and pointed at me before I even knew which direction the story was coming from. That evening I called my father. Not my mother, my father, because he's the quieter one, the one who processes before he speaks, and I needed at least one person in my family to hear the facts before they had a chance to become someone else's version. He answered on the 2nd ring. I told him what the bank had confirmed. I told him about Aunt Carla's call, about the pattern with the other family members, about the second account in Theo's name. I read him the text messages. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long silence. He said, "Let me call your mother." I said, "Okay." I sat at my kitchen table with Biscuit at my feet and I waited. An hour later, my father called back. He sounded like a man carrying something very heavy and trying not to show it. He said my mother was on the phone with Theo. He said Theo's story was changing. He said there had been, in my father's careful phrasing, some developments. What had actually happened, what I found out later in pieces, from my father and from Aunt Carla, and eventually from Theo himself in a court-ordered deposition, was this. The family friend Theo had borrowed from a man named Mr. Aldridge who'd known our family 20 years, had quietly hired a small claims attorney 3 months ago when Theo failed to repay him. The attorney had discovered the second bank account during routine financial discovery. Mr. DePaul. Aldridge hadn't told anyone yet because he was trying to handle it civilly. But when Aunt Carla reached out to him, he decided it was time to share what he knew. The night my father called back, my mother was hearing all of this for the first time. Everything she'd defended, every time she'd told Carla she was overreacting. Every time she'd looked at her son and believed the clean version of him over the complicated truth, Theo didn't confess heroically. He didn't have a moment of genuine remorse in a room full of the people he'd hurt. What he did was calculate very quickly that the math no longer worked in his favor. The bank records existed. Mr. Aldridge's attorney had documentation. My text thread was time-stamped. He was already 3 steps into a corner, and he was smart enough to know it. He told my parents that he'd made some mistakes, that he had a problem, that he needed help. Which is true. He does need help. I believe that. But believing someone needs help and being the person responsible for providing it are 2 different things, and I had spent 30 years confusing them. My parents paid back Mr. Aldridge. They paid back the cousin and the great-uncle. The $4,000 that Theo had funneled through me was frozen in his account, pending the small claims case, and eventually returned to me, plus the legal fees I'd accrued filing the police report. The report I filed led to a formal investigation. Theo was charged with theft by deception, a fourth-degree felony in Ohio. He pled guilty 6 months later in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 months probation, mandatory financial counseling, and restitution to all parties. He didn't serve time. I have complicated feelings about that. My mother called me 3 weeks after everything came out. She was not the crying in the driveway version of herself. She was quiet, which is the version of her I find harder to know how to hold. She said she was sorry. She said she should have listened. She said she didn't know how she'd missed it for so long. I didn't tell her it was because she hadn't wanted to see it. That's the kind of true thing that stops a conversation instead of moving it somewhere real. I said I knew it was hard. I said I needed some time. What I didn't say, what I've been saying to myself slowly over the months since, is this. The failure wasn't just Theo's. My family had a system, and I was part of it. I was the fixer, the absorber, the person who made problems disappear so that everyone else could keep believing the story they preferred. I did that job so thoroughly for so long that when I was accused of the very thing I'd been quietly preventing, no one had the framework to consider that impossible. You can't be the invisible net under the Trapeze Act, and then expect people to testify on your behalf when the trapeze artist says the net attacked him. I've been in therapy for 7 months. My therapist has a very irritating habit of asking me what I needed instead of what I did. I'm getting used to it. I still live in the same house. I still work the same job, still have Thai food on Thursdays, still have Biscuit pressing his warm weight against my legs every night. The ordinary life I built is still here, mostly intact, a little remodeled. Some relationships look different. My relationship with my mother is careful now, the way a bone is careful after it breaks. Not weaker, but changed. My father and I talk more than we used to. Theo and I do not talk. That's not a door I've slammed. It's just a door I've stopped standing in front of, waiting for it to open. A few months ago, I started a peer support group at my church for adult siblings of people with addiction and compulsive behavior. Not to process my own stuff publicly, I have therapy for that, but because I spent 32 years thinking I was the only person who felt this specific combination of love and exhaustion and shame, I wasn't. The room fills up every other week, and we sit in a circle on folding chairs, and we tell the truth. Someone asked me recently what I wish I'd known sooner. I had to think about it for a minute. I think what I wish I'd known is that loyalty is not the same as complicity. I thought I was protecting my family by absorbing the damage quietly. I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family whole. But the family was never whole. It was just good at looking that way from a distance, and I was the one working hardest to maintain the distance. My mother made it to Portugal last fall. She sent me a photo from a cafe in Lisbon, a tiny table, a glass of wine, afternoon light slanting through old stone. She looked tired and happy in the specific way that people look when they've finally done something they kept putting off. I texted back, "You deserve this. I meant it. That's the thing no one tells you about this kind of story. It doesn't end with a gavel or a verdict or a single moment where everything clicks into place and the grief lifts. It ends with a Tuesday afternoon and a photo from Portugal and the slow, unglamorous work of deciding who you want to be on the other side of something that tried to define you." Justice wasn't just the probation order. Justice was the Thursday dinners I stopped canceling, the emergency fund I rebuilt, the morning I woke up and didn't check my phone first thing because I wasn't waiting to manage anyone else's disaster, the peer group meeting where someone said exactly what I'd been feeling for 20 years and I didn't feel alone inside it anymore. That's what the other side looks like. Not perfect, not loud, just mine. If this story sounds familiar, if you recognize that particular exhaustion of being the person who holds everything together while someone else takes it apart, I want you to know that the silence you've been mistaken for strength, it's survivorship. And survivorship is not the same as staying. You already know the difference. You've always known. I thought a lot about what made this possible. Not just what Theo did, but what I did for years before that night that made it so easy for him to do it. Every time I wired money without asking questions, I taught him that questions wouldn't come. Every time I absorbed the blame quietly so the family dinner wouldn't turn into a fight, I taught him that I would keep absorbing. Every time I picked up the phone on the second ring because I couldn't stand the idea of him thinking I didn't care, I handed him one more tool. I built the trap myself. I just didn't know I was the one who'd end up inside it. That's the part nobody warns you about when they talk about being a good sibling, a good daughter, a responsible person. They tell you that loyalty matters. They don't tell you that loyalty without discernment isn't a virtue. It's a liability. I was so committed to being the person who held things together that I never stopped to ask what exactly I was holding together, and whether it deserved to be held. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the one thing I'd always done right without fully understanding why. I kept records. I kept the text thread. I kept the bank confirmation. I filed the report the same afternoon, even when part of me wanted to just sit on the kitchen floor and disappear into the grief of it. Something in me, some quiet, stubborn part that had survived 32 years of being underestimated, knew that the truth needed a paper trail because feelings don't hold up in small claims court, and love doesn't show up on a bank statement. That's what I want to say to anyone who's been the reliable one, the fixer, the person everyone calls at midnight. Your instinct to help is not the problem. The problem is helping in ways that ask nothing of the person you're helping, that shield them so completely from consequence that they never have to grow. I didn't help Theo by covering for him all those years. I helped him stay exactly the person he already was. Real care is harder than that. It looks like saying no when no is the honest answer. It looks like letting someone sit with the discomfort of a problem they created instead of rushing in with your emergency fund and your steadiness and your silence. It looks like trusting that the people you love are capable of handling hard things, and if they're not, that's information you need to have sooner, not later. My mother made it to Portugal. Theo is in counseling. I run a peer support group on Tuesday nights in a church basement, and every week someone walks in carrying the specific exhaustion of a person who has been quietly keeping someone else afloat for so long they forgot they were also allowed to swim. I tell them when I wish someone had told me earlier, loyalty is not the same as erasure. You are not responsible for managing the consequences of another person's choices. And the moment someone uses your kindness as cover for their dishonesty, you are not obligated to keep being kind in the same direction. Cause and effect are patient. They don't announce themselves. They just keep moving. And eventually, the truth finds the surface on its own. Your job is just to make sure you're still standing when it does.